appreciate you taking the time to join us. We know your time is valuable, but I also know that everybody's been looking forward to hearing more about the summer EBT administrative funding, and we hope that you find this webinar helpful. Next slide, please. So our agenda, oh, I apologize. Before I jump into the agenda, I do want to say that I am joined today by my colleagues from several of our program areas and from our financial management office. We will, during the Q&As, have one of the program office staff members join us. In terms of what we're going to cover today, we'll do an introduction to the summer EBT program. We're going to talk about the requirements for obtaining administrative funding, how to submit those requests, how to complete an FNS 366A expenditure plan. We'll talk a little bit about fiscal year 24 EBT administrative funding. We'll also talk about fiscal year 25 summer EBT implementation costs. And then we'll touch upon administrative costs and cost allocations. And then we will move into a discussion of some tools and some places where additional documentation can be found, and then some nice to know pieces that the program will share with you, and then we'll move into questions. Please advance. So let's start with the introduction to summer EBT. So I know almost all of you already know this, but the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023 authorized a permanent nationwide summer electronic benefit transfer program that begins in 2024. Summer EBT is a federally assisted program, and it provides EBT benefits to children who would lose access during free and reduced price meals during the summer when school is not in session. States provide benefits on EBT cards, which can be used to purchase food from approved retailers. Next slide, please. FNS is authorized to pay each summer EBT agency an amount equal to 50% of the administrative expenses incurred in operating the program up to their approved FNS 366A level. This means that summer EBT agencies may only draw 50% of incurred expenses from their letter of credit. Each summer EBT agency in direct receipt of a summer EBT administrative grant will be responsible for providing the required 50% match. I do want to note that the summer EBT agency match may consist of project cost paid for with state or ITO funds, or with cash that's contributed or donated to the agency by other non-federal public agencies or institutions. And consistent with the governing 2 CFR 200 uniform administrative requirements, cash or in-kind contributions are generally allowable if they are verifiable, allowable, and necessary, and in the agency's approved budget, and not related to any other federal program costs unless specifically provided for in regulations. The value of, I will note, the value of services rendered by volunteers or provided by third parties, the value of goods are contributed by third parties, exclusive of state, Indian tribal organization, or federal agencies, are not allowable cash or in-kind contributions in the summer. Please advance to the next slide. So we're going to move into a discussion about administrative funding and how the request will work. I do want to point out before we jump into the next slide that we're going to start by talking about what is known as the interim and final POM. We'll talk about that in a moment. That is the sort of the overall overarching general requirements for seeking total funding. That will be followed by a discussion dealing with the seeking of initial, what we call seed money and initial allocation. I just am pointing this out because the order may strike people as, oh, wait a minute, you just said this, and now we're talking about the initial allocation. But it's important that we understand the overall construct of how the seeking total administrative funds will work. And then we'll talk about an initial allocation that FNS can make available. Next slide, please. So how do states obtain administrative funds under summer EBT? All state agencies and ITOs operating the summer EBT program will be required to submit a management and administration plan referred to as a plan for operations and management, We call it the POM. An interim POM is due as soon as practicable for fiscal year 24 and annually thereafter by August 15th. Final POMs are due by February 15th. An approved POM will establish the summer EBT agency's available administrative funding for the year. So accordingly, the POM is a prerequisite for a summer EBT agency to be able to utilize federal funds to cover and to draw funds to cover their 50% of administrative costs. Although a final POM is not due until February 15th, an interim POM is due as soon as practicable, as noted above. And as we note there, annually thereafter on August 15th. Next slide, please. The interim POM is being made available as part of this process because it allows summer EBT agencies to access federal administrative funds in advance of completing the full planning process. An interim POM must include the summer EBT agency's best estimates on forecasted program participation, anticipated administrative funding needs as expressed on the FNS 366A expenditure plan, and other programmatic information required in the final POM to the extent that such information has been determined at the time of submission. Now, on the next slide, we'll talk about the final POM. The final POM must include the comprehensive needs of the state or Indian tribal organization's summer EBT program to include coordinating and partnering summer EBT agency costs and any local agency costs as applicable. The summer EBT agencies plan to comply with any standards prescribed by the Secretary for the use of these funds and how program funds will be used to the maximum extent practicable to reach eligible children. The total amount of administrative funding being requested by one or more FNS 366A expenditure plan submission is also required and should denote amounts per each summer EBT agency. So I will note that although a final POM may be submitted in lieu of an interim POM at your discretion, but that interim POM has been put in place to allow you time to seek funding before you have finalized your POM for the year. Next slide, please. Now, for approval of POMs, a final approved POM will establish the summer EBT agency's available administrative funding level for the fiscal year. States, EBT agencies, though, will have the opportunity to revise these FNS 366As throughout the operational year, and increases for well-documented cost will be considered subject to available funding. All administrative funds for summer EBT are subject to a 50% match requirement by statute. While administrative funds may be received prior to approval of a final POM, a summer EBT agency may not draw down federal food benefit funds until the POM is approved. Next slide, please. So in this section, we're going to talk about completing the FNS 366A. As I mentioned, the 366A is a component of the POM approval. And so we wanted to help focus on this. Next slide, please. Focus on this so that you'll have a sense of many of you are actually familiar with the 366A. It was utilized in the pandemic EBT. And and you also use it in the SNAP program, but you were probably familiar with it in the context of the PEBT program. This is a separate and distinct form for the summer EBT. And the 366A must accompany both an interim and a final POM. And it needs to reflect the planned administrative costs for the year. So when the FNS 366A is submitted with the interim or final POM, it constitutes each summer EBT agency's request for funds for planned administrative expenditures. An approved POM will establish the summer EBT agency's available administrative funding level for the fiscal year. But you will have the opportunity to revise the FNS 366A throughout the operational year, and increases for well-documented cost will be considered subject to available funding. All administrative funds, again, I know I've said this before, are subject to the 50% matching requirement. I do want to point out for states that administer the summer EBT through more than one one agency, the agencies may submit separate administrative funding requests. That is your FNS 366A expenditure plan. But ultimately, there must be coordination between the state agencies to ensure that costs are allocated properly and that there is not duplication in cost, and that ultimately the final approved POM has an understanding and is reflective of the costs of both agencies that are involved. Next slide, please. So to complete the FNS 366A for summer EBT, FNS developed instructions on how to do so. So we recently, I'm sure all of you know, we recently released our summer EBT administrative memo. And we have an attachment A in that memo. In that attachment, we give guidance on and instructions on how to fill out the form, recognizing that there are aspects of this form that are very SNAP specific and that you may not need to use. But it also gives guidance on how to help estimate cost and your administrative cost needs, and basically how to align your costs with specific line items on that form. Next slide, please. This is just, we wanted to include a screenshot of the FNS 366A. For anybody who hasn't seen it, that we wanted to give you a sense of what it looks like. And again, please refer to your memo, the memo that we recently sent out, and refer to the guidance. We are also here to help in any way that we can. We recognize that this is a new program. We want to be as helpful as we can in providing technical assistance. If you have questions, please reach out to your regional offices, who can in turn discuss with us, and we will try, if you have any confusion, we will do our best to help alleviate that confusion. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about, we talked a little bit about how to seek the funding, the mechanisms to seek it. But now let's talk about the actual 24 summer EBT administrative funding. Initial fiscal year 2024 administrative funding will entail FNS releasing an initial allocation of summer EBT administrative funds upon receipt of 2 documents. So remember earlier when I told you we were going to walk through sort of just how the process is going to unfold and take place. But then I would talk about the initial seed money. Well, FNS, recognizing that states are probably in a position where incremental funding could help address immediate expenses, is going to release an initial allocation of these summer EBT administrative funds, as long as a summer EBT agency can provide the following 2 documents. Those documents include a notice of intent to administer the program in 2024 and an affirmative statement indicating that funding has been identified and is available to the summer EBT agency to meet the required 50% match. At this juncture, when you're seeking the initial administrative funding, you do not need the FNS 366A to have been submitted. You do need it for your interim POM and your final, but this basically precedes that a bit to get you started. And the 2 documents that are needed are the notice of intent and the affirmative statement. So, but keep in mind, even as you have the initial allocation, states can only draw 50% funding for expenses that have already been incurred. That's important to recognize. Next slide, please. The notice of intent is actually required by law and a prerequisite for states and Indian tribal organizations to begin operating the program in 2024. And therefore, it is required no later than January 1, 2024. However, if a state agency or ITO desires an initial seed money allocation earlier in the year, before they've had time to submit their interim or final POM, they must submit this notice of intent to seek that initial allocation. The affirmative statement must, as we said earlier, must clearly attest that funds are available for the match. Initial 2024 administrative funds will not be released until both of these documents have been provided. On the next slide, we wanted to give you, a lot of folks have been asking us, is there going to be a template for these forms? And there is a template. And we're sharing both of those with you here today. So this slide is the notice of intent template. And as you can see, it basically has you fill in the agency name. And, and if there are more than two, if there's a coordinating and partnering agency, both will need to sign. And it basically, indicates your intention to administer the program in 2024, that you plan to operate during 2024. I do want to point out that this notice does not bind the states or Indian tribal organizations to administering the program in 2024. And should any unforeseen challenges come up, that present a barrier, an absolute barrier to being able to move forward, then we will work with you. We recognize that that is always a possibility, that this is just a notice of intent, that things can happen. So please recognize that by signing this, FNS realizes that there may be unforeseen challenges. For states, the notice of intent must name the summer EBT coordinating agency and any partner agencies and include the authorized signatory for both parties. For Indian tribal organizations, the notice of intent must name the administering agency and include the authorized signatory for that agency. Submission, again, I know I said this before, but submission of the notice of intent is a prerequisite for receiving 24 administrative funds, whether they're initial or your total amount that you seek later. Next slide, please. The affirmative statement doesn't have to be elaborate. We've provided the template that you guys will be able to utilize. You do not need to provide documentation of your matching funds or information on the source of those funds, but you must clearly attest that the funds have been identified and are available to you to meet the required 50% match. This is important, as you can't, draw funds until you've actually, expended on your cost. So you actually will have had to have incurred the cost in order to apply to ask for the match. So we could talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. I do also want to point out the affirmative statement can either be attached, you can submit them separately because they are two different templates, or you can also combine them into one document and submit in that fashion. Next slide, please. Initial 24 administrative funding allocations. Now we're going to address sort of what we're basing that initial allocation on. It will be based on expenditure and unliquidated obligation data reported to FNS on the SNAP Pandemic EBT Administration Grant or the CNP EBT Administration Grant reports as appropriate for fiscal year 21 and 22. If data is not available, then an initial amount will be made available in the amount of $100,000. Initial fiscal year 2024 funds will be provided in an amount equaling up to 16.25% of the average total expenditures for both grant years, or 100,000, whichever is greater. This amount will be calculated by FNS. The states, ITOs don't have to do this portion. Will be calculated by FNS and will be provided to each summer EBT agency by their respective regional offices. And that will happen once the notice of intent and affirmative statement have been provided. Next slide, please. Regional offices will inform each state agency and Indian tribal organization of the initial funding amount available to them once those letters are submitted. Initial funding will be made through the FNS 529 Grant Award Agreement document. Many of you are familiar with this. We used this same grant award agreement when we awarded the EBT administrative grants. Again, if you get an initial allocation, you're going to sign a 529 for those funds, accepting those grant awards. And then if you seek more funding through an interim and final POM, which is likely, then that 529 will be modified. And the modification will happen once full budget proposals are approved. We have included the assistance listing number there because we know that you always need to have that number. That will also be already filled in on your 529 grant award agreements. But as you can see here, it is 10.646 Summer Electronic Benefit Transfer Program for Children. Any summer EBT agency that receives fiscal year 24 administrative funding as a direct grant must sign a 529. grant award agreement with their respective regional office. So again, I know I just said that, but wanted to make clear that that will be a requirement to receive funds. So additional 2024 funding. As we've stated in prior slides, the states will receive additional funding upon approval of a 366A and POM. The period of performance, next slide, please. The period of performance for fiscal year 2024 summer EBT administrative funding grants will be October 1, 2023 to September 30, 2024. Accordingly, any incurred expense within this time period may be applied to this fiscal year 2024 grant. Next slide, please. So we know that this has been on everybody's mind and whether or not they can use fiscal year 24 administrative funding for fiscal year 2025 implementation costs. States and ITOs intending to begin operating summer EBT in fiscal year 2025 may receive administrative funding in fiscal year 24 to cover planning and implementation costs related to fiscal year 2025 summer EBT operations. However, a new fiscal year 25 interim POM and FNS 366A expenditure plan will need to be submitted by August 15th, 2024 to receive administrative funding for fiscal year 25. And a fiscal year 25 final POM will need to be approved in order to receive benefits funds for fiscal year 2025. So the intent here is that we recognize that a lot of state agencies and Indian tribal organizations may be intending to operate in 25, or maybe they have intentions even in 24, but they may not be able to get to it till 25. So, but they need to get ready, and they'll have implementation and development costs. So the funds will be made available in 24 for that purpose. However, it still will require that proper documentation is submitted. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk a little bit about additional requirements for summer EBT administrative funding. And the first thing we're going to touch upon is considerations for local administrative costs. Expenses incurred by local education agencies and other local agencies carrying out summer EBT operational activities under formal agreements with a summer EBT agency are allowable costs under the summer EBT administrative funding grants. Summer EBT agencies are only required to reimburse for expenses directly related to the activities and processes required to implement the summer EBT program. In no cases may nonprofit school food service account funding be used to meet the summer EBT match. In 2024 only, summer EBT agencies may delegate application processing to LEAs. However, if a summer EBT agency delegates application processing to their LEAs, then it must cover all of the administrative costs incurred by the LEAs with respect to summer EBT application processing. For LEAs that plan to use alternative income forms to certify children for summer EBT in 2024, many of these forms have already been accepted and processed by LEAs. Allowable administrative costs. Allowable administrative costs for summer EBT administrative funds are to operate the summer EBT at the state, Indian tribal organization, and local levels. Like any program, allowable costs have to be allowable, reasonable, necessary, and allocable. That doesn't change in this program. Examples of allowable summer EBT administrative expenses may include, but they are not limited to, salaries and benefits of personnel involved in the summer EBT and administrative support, office equipment, supplies, postage, and copying and printing costs, indirect costs, outreach associated with the enrollment or the delivery of the summer EBT program, and EBT related or system cost. Summer EBT is distinct from other FNS programs, and therefore summer EBT agencies may not use federal funds intended for other programs. For example, SNAP, WIC, National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast, for summer EBT expenses. If a summer EBT agency conducts activities that will benefit the administration of more than one federal program, the agency must appropriately allocate administrative costs to each affected program. As a reminder, child nutrition state administrative expenses, CNSAE funds, may not be used to support summer EBT costs in 2024 and beyond. You know, I will say you can imagine there may be instances where a cost is fully chargeable to CNSAE, and as long as it is for an allowable activity under CNSAE, fully allowable, fully chargeable, it is possible there may be an indirect or benefit to the summer EBT activities, but the point here is that that summer EBT is a separate program, and therefore costs that impact the summer EBT need to be allocated accordingly to summer EBT. Next slide, please. So what will the method of payment be for these administrative funds? Administrative funds will be provided through a letter of credit. The letter of credit allows summer EBT agencies to draw authorized funds from the United States Treasury. The draw of 50% funding from the letter of credit will occur once allowable costs have been incurred. And during the annual closeout for these grants, just like any other program, FNS will recover administrative funds which are in excess of obligations reported at the end of the fiscal year through an adjustment to the letter of credit. And, you know, for the most part, all of you have letters of credit, so this should not be an issue and should be something you are familiar with. Reporting requirements. EBT administrative funds reporting consists of two primary reports. There's going to be the FNS 366A expenditure plan that we talked about. That will be submitted annually. That is not a quarterly report. It will be submitted annually, or if you revise it. So again, you're submitting this with your interim POM or your final POM. If between your interim and your final, you have to revise dollar amounts, then you will need to submit a new one with the final POM. Summer EBT agencies will report their incurred administrative expenses on an FNS 778 financial status report on a quarterly basis. This will be a program-specific report specific to summer EBT. The FNS 778 will collect only summer EBT administrative expenses and will be separate from the FNS 778 submitted in connection with the SNAP program. Again, different programs, and so this is a program-specific form to summer EBT. Both forms, both the 366A and the 778, will be submitted in our in FNS's food program reporting system. We call it FIPPers. Again, I know all of you are familiar with this system. More information will also be coming out at a later date if you need to have specific access to this specific program reporting in our FIPPers system. I think the next slide shows, just has a screenshot of what the FNS 778 financial status report looks like. Again, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but in case you are not, we wanted to share this, provide a screenshot for you. And I do believe that these slides will be made available to all of you, and so you will have access to this. The next slide shows a screenshot of the FNS 366A. Again, this is what you'll be submitting in FIPPers annually or as amended. I think that, again, if you refer to the administrative memo that we released recently, you will see that there is guidance in here that talks a bit about, you know, which categories, because again, these categories are used in SNAP, which categories might you anticipate or expect to utilize in this program, and it gives a bit of guidance that kind of walks you through that process. But I before I turn over to my colleague Ann Fiala, I want to say that again, you know, we recognize that this is a new program. FNS is here to help you. We are here to provide any technical assistance or guidance that you need. All you need to do is reach out to your regional office, and they'll work with us, and we'll do our best to give you answers to anything that you need. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ann Fiala, and she will talk about more information that's coming soon and answer any questions or take questions.
Thanks, Lynn. I can't promise to answer all the questions. I can take the questions. And as a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A function if you have them. We're monitoring and can respond to some live, some in writing, so keep them coming. So as Lynn said, I'm Ann Fiala and I work for Food and Nutrition Services Child Nutrition Programs, and I'm working currently on implementing summer EBT. So thanks, Lynn, for all that really great information. We know this is the type of information that you guys need right now in advance of the IFR, that some things just can't wait until December. But this isn't the only stuff that you need. So we, as we're developing policy, are trying to triage the stuff that we know you need most so we can get stuff out in advance of end of this year. So, please keep your questions coming. It helps us to see, what questions are coming up most and prioritize what we can get out. So with that in mind, I have a couple up here that are frequently asked that I can provide some more information on at this point. So I will tell you verbally, but we will also follow up in writing since we know that that's very important. So the first one is about the timeline for expungement. The statute says that expungement cannot be longer than 4 months. We're going to operationalize this by requiring benefits to be expunged 122 days from issuance. So again, that's 122 days from issuance, which is our equivalent of 4 months. We also have got a lot of questions about the opt-out process. Do you need to do it? And the short answer is yes. The statute, requires states and ITOs to have a process so those children who are streamlined certified or automatically enrolled are able to opt out of participation. Now, there are various ways to do this. States will be required to do a summer EBT application. We've heard from some states that they're interested in adding, features to their application platform, like address update, and perhaps you could add an opt-out function there. You could also work it into your customer service call line. Lots of options, and we're looking forward to seeing your innovations. But we do understand that you might not be able to stand up a new system in the immediate term. So we are happy to be flexible for 2024. If you have another solution, please bring it to us. One example that we've heard is that states who simply just can't get a process up and running for 2024 could direct households that don't want to participate to cut up their cards when they receive them rather than use them. So if these are options you're looking at, please reach out to your regional offices and we can talk to you about how we can make it work for 24. We've also been asked a lot, and Lynn covered this a minute ago too, about who needs to offer an application for 2024, I should say a summer EBT application, and who needs to pay for it in 2024. Summer EBT applications are ultimately the summer EBT agency's responsibility, not the local, but we do have some flexibility for 24. Summer EBT agencies can assign these activities to their LEAs, but if they do that, they have to pay for the new costs associated with the processing of those applications. And then in 2025 and beyond, summer EBT agencies can enter into contracts with LEAs to process applications, but they can't delegate that responsibility. We've also had quite a few states ask about the timing of issuing benefits. What's the latest they can do it? Summer EBT, as we all know, is a seasonal program, and it's designed to provide benefits during a really specific window so that kids who are out of school for the summer, get the nutrition that they need. So it is really important that summer EBT agencies are able to provide benefits, during the period of activity, during the time that kids need them. But once again, little 2024 caveat, we do understand that it's going to take time for you to get your systems up and develop the processes that will allow you to reliably get these benefits out. So, while it's not ideal, issuing summer EBT benefits soon after the end of the summer period could be allowable for 2024. We are ready to work with you, if whatever technical assistance you need to make sure benefits are issued as timely as possible. But there is some flexibility there, and there will be more guidance to come on this issue. And then, we're also hearing a lot about fair hearings and adverse actions. Again, we know this is a really important topic because it has impacts on your staffing hours and how you are planning your resources. We are close to having something that we can share. We're working to establish requirements that are going to be responsive to the unique needs of summer EBT. And I'm not able to provide full information now, but wanted to let you know that that is coming. Other ones that are on the horizon, we have a lot of questions about overclaims and about verification. So those are ones that well, I can't speak to today, I want to let people know are coming. And, you know, this is what we can say today. I hope it's helpful, but please do keep working with your regional offices and send in questions. As you send them in, please flag if it's time sensitive so that, you know, as we're doing our triage process, we know what needs to come sooner rather than later, what needs to come in advance of the IFR. You know, if you have a work stoppage, if you don't get information by the end of December, let us know. If, you know, help us help you with getting information out. So that's what I have on this. So with that, we can move to the next slide, which is, Scan Me. So this is the implementation toolkit. This is up online. We're adding information to it constantly. There are some of the templates that we talked about today in there for like the IPOM. There's, you know, charts on submission. So please do check it out. If you know how to use a QR code, just hold your phone in front of it and click on the button when you're looking at the camera. It'll take you to the web page. And so with that, we can go to Q&As. So we have been looking at Q&As here in the chat, and